Alright, folks, today we'll discuss some book about Arabic culture, and yeah, the book in general called Cambridge Companions to Philosophy, and in terms of Arabic culture. So, buckle up, let's learn some useful things from this book. You ever notice how two people can go through the exact same situation and end up with completely different lives? Same message, same words, same silence. One guy spirals, the other guy shrugs and moves on. And at first glance, it feels like personality or luck or some people just build different. But if you zoom in like a little deeper, what is actually happening is way more mechanical and honestly a bit uncomfortable because it means most of your because it means most of your reactions, they're not coming from reality, they're coming from a story. In other words, for example, if you see some whatever situation at the street, at the same situation, like 10 different people react differently because their like own mind interpret that situation in different unique way. So we kind of have this kind of like a storyteller in our head. Okay, let me give you a simple scene. You send a message, no reply, 10 minutes, nothing, 1 hour, still nothing. And now your brain starts working, and this is where it's getting interesting, yeah, because your brain does not just, sits quietly, it starts writing. Because this motherfucker never shut up, right? Especially when you want to sleep. And suddenly, without you even noticing, three different versions of reality appear. Like, in other words, when especially nothing happening, people get to like a panic or thinking, and your brain start to give you like a bunch of versions. Maybe like, in other words, for example, as I said, when you're texting and there is no response, your brain thinks like, oh, maybe they're ignoring me, oh, maybe they're busy, oh, maybe they saw it and don't care. Same event, three completely different worlds. And here's the part nobody tells you. You don't react to the event, you react to the version you picked. In other words, you don't see just like a fact data in front of you like a computer. Computer do not like a reacting emotionally when you like sending something. Oh my god, what did you send me? I'm crying. No. The thing about humans that we not just this thing, we labeling that with the meaning, and most of the time that meaning is wrong, but we tend to believe to the meaning, not to the exact thing which we see. That's the like interesting part of it. That's the thing of about in general human biases that different people see what they want to see instead of seeing just what they actually see. Okay, now if you open open up the actual philosophy behind this, and I mean like real medieval Arabic philosophy, not like Instagram quotes. They had a very precise word for this mechanism. They call it mana. MANA. Not just it. not just meaning in a loose sense, like translation, but more like the mental layer you attach to reality before you feel anything. And it's the difference between seeing something and deciding what it means. And once that meaning is attached, game over. Emotion follows automatically. In other words, the point of this like Arabic philosophical thing that again, if we see something, we labeling that like directing, linking that with the meaning, and after we get emotion. So the process looks like this, like order, right? Event, meaning, emotion, and action. In other words, most of the time, people acting based on emotions rather than based on their logic. No, not event, emotion. That middle step, that's where your life is being, let's call it, decided quietly, constantly, and let's make it let's make it more real, right? Your boss, for example, says, "We need to talk tomorrow," and that's it. No context. Not now. Watch your brain, and it doesn't wait. It doesn't ask. It doesn't collect evidence. It generates stories fast, and just because you get like a fast like a idea, like when it's like a clicking immediately, it's happened because of this, the speed not necessarily, like most of the time it's opposite. The first idea that you got, it's not correct all the time, because another thing about brain, that brain is lazy. It is wanna save like energy and give you easy, quick answer. And instead of like believing to it, you just have to assess the situation better logically. Yes, it takes more time, maybe another, I don't know, a couple seconds or maybe minutes or maybe days, but it's going to be way better decision rather than like blindly following the first idea. So, and I got another three different stories. For example, story one, I messed up, I am in trouble, like different versions of how brain reacts, right? Story two is just a normal check-in, and another story, like interpretation, let's call it, maybe something new is coming. And here's what's wild: your body reacts as if the story is already true, and that's really makes sense, true. Like remember when you like watch it, for example, I don't know, horror movie, you know that like this shit in front of you, not even real, like in terms of like it's all fucking fakes, AGI, CGI, that kind of shit. But the way how your body, like you get scared, your emotions change, the same way as if this is gonna be real. In other words, your mind not always can distinguish what is real and what is not. Like, heart rate changes, mood shifts, focus drops. And not because of reality, because of interpretation. You get me? Again, just because you giving some meaning, interpreting something like what is happening in front of you, It doesn't mean that, like for example, this event got just like a one interpretation, because again, you gotta, simply speaking, you have to develop different types of, like, let's call it storytellers in your brain. So instead of following on autopilot just like a first idea, you objectively assessing all possible outcomes, like alternatives, and based on your rational logic, you choosing one of them instead of following your emotions. And if you think you're choosing, so-called choosing that interpretation consciously, but you're not, at least not by default. Daniel Kahneman, the guy who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, would call this System 1: fast, automatic, emotional, and it doesn't care about accuracy, it cares about speed. And speed has a bias. Fear is faster than logic, always. And that's why your brain prefers negative stories first, not because they're correct, but because evolutionary it was safer to assume danger. In other words, we'll in one hand lucky that we have this kind of like a fast response to the situation, especially when it's like a dangerous situation. We reacting quickly in order to save our ass or someone else. Yeah, but the thing is, we right now living in modern life where it's not exactly that kind of like a old school jungles where we gotta save ourselves from the tiger. In this modern life, we gotta be more rational, logical, and process things longer to have in order to have logical conclusion instead of like following the first emotional response, because not because they're correct, but because evolutionary it was safer to assume danger, as I said before, and better to overreact than underreact. And that's an ancient deal your brain made. But here's the problem in modern life, like as a repeating this point of view, you're not being chased by predators, you're being chased by your own interpretations, and most of them are low quality. And just give your like that let's call smart part of your brain more time to assess the situation, because once you understand this, really understand it, something shifts. Because and after you stop asking like what is happening, and you start asking what story did I just create. In other words, you observing objectively your, like, let's say first interpretation of this event, right? And you asking, like, for example, okay, this ABC happened, and possibly it means, like, I don't know, this, like XYZ, right? But you're not again immediately believing to it, right? You think maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's another interpretation, and by having different many possibilities, you can choose one of them which got more evidence, facts, and after, at the end of the day, you're making rational, correct, or closer to correct decision, not like a blind decision. And let me show you how this plays out in a normal day. Uh, you walk past someone you know, they don't say hi. Instant story could be they don't like me. Now pause. Is that the only possible explanation? In other words, don't immediately punch them. Try to get maybe, I don't know, they could be tired, distracted, didn't see you. Maybe they blind, I don't know, thinking about something heavy, but your brain didn't pick the most logical story, it picked the fastest one. And usually the most negative one. That's another thing that most of the time is like a storytellers stories, low quality, easy answers, and most of the time to the negative. But it also depends on the context, of course. It goes to the negative outcome. Now imagine you train yourself just a little to interrupt that. Not like a stopping thoughts. That's impossible, but I don't know, you can smash your brain to the wall, but it's going to be extreme. But question them just slightly, like for example, okay, what else could this mean? In other words, you asking yourself, okay, motherfucker storyteller, I get you, but maybe there's another interpretations, and suddenly you're not stuck inside like one version of reality. You kind of like a escaping, like you're like a mind prison, you know. You're not getting married just to the one idea. You asking yourself, maybe there's another rooms of ideas, it should be, maybe I'm wrong. And by just like asking this kind of the same questions, you forcing yourself to think about another interpretations, and that changes everything, because now you're not the character in the story, you're the editor. And this is where the most people misunderstand control. They think control means like, no negative thoughts. That's nonsense. Control is choosing which thought gets to stay. In other words, you pick up between different interpretation, one of them. Let's go back to the message example. Like for example, no reply like for like 5 hours. Default brain would say they ignoring me. Trained brain would say could be 5 different reasons. I don't have enough data. You see the difference? One creates tension, the other preserves energy. In other words, maybe you ask, like you, for example, again, you see something, and instead of like following the first idea, you asking yourself, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I should consider another data points to have better conclusion. And instead of being emotional, you train yourself to objectively collect more data instead of reacting emotionally. And again, this is it's not just about emotions. This affects decisions, big ones, like a business, relationships, opportunities. Because if your interpretation is off, your decision will be off, even if your logic is perfect. I've seen this play out a lot of like with the people try to learn something new. Let's say you're learning English, you try to speak, you make mistake, and Now your brain jumps in, I'm bad at this. That's not a fact, that's a story. A very lazy one, by the way, because a more accurate version would be I made a mistake in this specific sentence. Yeah, in other words, you're just focusing to the exact mistake you're making, like right now, instead of like panicking and generalizing, like what kind of dumb monkey I am. But your brain prefers global conclusions. They're simpler and they feel more real. In other words, if you not control and guide your brain, it could be your enemy. That's an important point. Now imagine you change that, right? Same mistake, different interpretation. You can say, good, now I know what to fix. In other words, instead of panicking, once you find out your mistake, error, you instead of like reacting negatively, you're reacting positively because you know what exact thing you did wrong, so you know what to fix and where to fix. The same event, you see, but different reaction, completely different trajectory. And this is why like a two people can start at the same point and end up like miles apart, and not because of the talent, but because of interpretation habits. Now let's make this practical, really practical. Here's the simple rule you can start using today, not tomorrow, but today. Whenever you feel a negative reaction like irritation, anxiety, frustration, do not fight the feeling. Instead, ask, what story did I just tell myself? You see, what story did I just tell myself about this, I don't know, message, event, or person? And then, what are two other possible explanations? In other words, you don't have to create like a millions of interpretations. The point is not like overwhelm your brain, but at least like try to create at least like a three alternative like explanations, not just one, right? And that's it. You don't need 10. It could be just another two, because the moment you generate alternatives, you weaken the grip of the first story, and that creates space, and space is where control lives. If you want to take like one step further, here's a sharper version. You can ask, which version of this story is supported by evidence, not emotion? Again, you want to make like decision. Again, sorry. You want to make decision based on facts, not based on emotions. All right, and over time, something subtle happens. You become harder to disturb, not because life gets easier, but because your interpretation get cleaner. And this is the part I like the most. You don't need motivation for this. You don't need energy. You don't even need to feel good. You just need to ask better questions. In other words, if you want to get better outcome, better decision, ask another better question. In other words, better question, the beginning of the better decision. Because at the end of the day, your life is not shaped by what happens. It's shaped by the meanings you assign quietly, repeatedly, And again, you don't control, every thought that appears, but absolutely control which one becomes your reality. And once you realize that, you stop being dragged by your mind, and you, most importantly, start to using it in productive way. Alright, let's continue. And before we were talking about again about like the mind assigning the meaning to the events, now based on this Cambridge book about Arabic philosophy, now the text in this book shifts from like psychology to physics. But the move is not random at all. It's basically saying, hold on, maybe reality itself is not as smooth and obvious as it looks. Maybe even motion, space, bodies, and change things thinkers had to reinterpret from scratch. So if the previous section was about like how your mind tells stories about life, this section is about how philosophers told stories about reality itself, and which stories about like motion, matter, and change were like actually coherent. And honestly, that makes it fun because you can feel the same pattern again. Like one event, several possible explanations, then a fight over like which explanation is actually the strongest. And only now the event is not so-called someone didn't text back. Now the event is how does a thing move from A to B, and suddenly the room fills up with competing storytellers again. For example, one guy says reality is built from like invisible tiny units. Another says no, motion only works because things jump. Or another says infinity is real in a stronger sense than Aristotle admitted. Then Avicenna walks in and says, more or less, all of you are seeing something important, but none of you has fully nailed the mechanics. And that's the broad frame. Now let's make the whole stretch usable and memorable. And for this, here's like first big takeaway that physics here is not just so-called science. It's a fight about what reality is made of. And the chapter opens up by making a sharp point that natural philosophy is not only about describing visible things, it's also about the basic structure of the sensible world, almost like an ontology of what change, body, motion, and matter even are. In other words, physics here is still tied to metaphysics. It's not just like so-called what like a falls faster, but what kind of world must exist for falling to make sense at all. And that mattered because it changed the tone completely. These people are not merely arguing over like measurements. They are arguing over the hidden architecture of reality, like what is behind the scenes. Let's call it. Think of it like this: you watch like a football fly through the air. A modern person says, "Cool, let's model the trajectory." These earlier thinkers ask a stranger, deeper question: what has to be true about the world for there to even be a trajectory? In other words, does the ball move through a truly continuous path? Does it pass through infinitely many points? Are there smallest units of position? Does motion happen smoothly or through leaps or through renewed force? Even like in other words, way complicated things they wanted to get just in terms of like a small ball. And this is why the text says the debate keeps circling around two giant issues, minima and actuality versus potentiality. And roughly speaking, the smallest irreducible units, and in what sense are the points or like stages of motion really there? And that is already a nice bridge to the earlier like a chapter on the mind, because before the question was what meaning does the mind attach, right? But now the question is what structure does reality itself have before we describe it? Kind of similar to the let's call it like in AI language like a system prompts. In other words, the point is, I guess, yeah, we giving different meanings to the things, but this kind of Arabic ancient philosophers, I guess, they were going behind and thinking broader in a way that maybe this kind of things is already built into reality, and we just like we think, of course, that we giving meaning like individually from ourselves, but maybe we just taking things from the world, from reality, which already got this kind of system prompts, you want to call it, or like architecture, in other words, same intellectual muscle, just pointed outward. And Abu al-Hudhayl, like I guess it's another Arabic philosopher's name. Reality may be built from tiny so-called stops, not like a seamless flow. Like in other words, it was his own like point of view. Like his point is that reality built from the kind of like a different separate realities, not like continuous, like infinite, I guess, his interpretation. One of the earliest major voices here, like this Abu al-Hudhayl, his idea is basically this. Bodies are made of like invisible parts, not like a tiny little visible pebbles, but minimal units that have no extension and indistinguishable from one another. And they are not themselves like full bodies, they are what bodies are composed of. That already sounds abstract, and it is actually, but the reality important part is what does to motion. If motion happens in a world built from like such units, then movement starts to look less like a perfectly smooth stream and more like a sequence of occupancy. So kind of, again, if I get this right, it looks like a different Lego puzzles, and not like a smoothly built one thing, so-called reality. A body is here, then there, then there again. In other words, it's kind of reminding me how they calling in quantum physics superposition, something like that, when, like, there's a, let's say, I don't know, cat inside of the box, and that cat inside of the box until it's open, that cat dead, alive, and etc. at the same time, like multiple realities, versions of it, kind of similar with that concept. The world is still intelligible, but continuity is no longer something you simply take for granted. A very practical way to picture his intuition. Imagine like an old video game map made of like a hidden tiles. To your eyes, the character looks like he's running smoothly across the screen, but underneath, the program may still be moving him from position to position, tile to tile. In other words, it is like especially old school games when you're playing and everything's smooth, but just in terms of where you are, and you can, for example, I don't know, go to another street because it's like developers didn't fully created that street. In other words, everything's smooth, but it's just smooth right now in your, like, let's say, location. In other words, not fully developed reality. And that is not like a perfect analogy, but it gets you close. And Abu al Hudhail, this like Arabic philosopher name, is basically saying maybe the world is not like one like a silky uninterrupted carpet. Maybe underneath there like basic positions or like indivisibles. And what's fascinating is that this is not like presented as like a crude little bolts or atomism. The text stresses that his conception is more like abstract than that. It is tied to like ontology and position, not just like made like manufacture. So yeah, like we were discussing about different things, like a final casual wrap up, let's call it. If I stitch this like a section to the previous one as like a smooth, like a podcast thought, it goes like this. First, the book showed that your mind does not just receive reality, as we discussed, it attaches meanings and runs with the story. Not like a factual based thinking, but like more like a meaning emotional based thinking. Now it shows that even reality, especially motion and change, cannot be trusted at like a first glance either. What looks like one seamless flow may hide invisibles, leaps, distinct stages, dynamic intensities, and much messier relation between potential and actual than you first assumed. And that's why this whole book is more useful than it may look. And it's not just giving historical trivia, it is training a habit. Do not fall in love with the first smooth explanation. Interrogate the hidden structure. Check what the story leaves out, and whenever something looks so-called obviously continuous, ask whether that's reality speaking or just your imagination drawing a neat line from start to finish. In other words, like a confirmation bias when you want to see what you want to see, but ignoring another facts what is like contradict with your point of view. That's where the real intelligence begins. And if you want, I can talk about these kind of things in the next podcast. Just let me know in comments below. But for now, thanks for listening. Smash the like button, subscribe button, and see you next time, my fellow, I don't know, whatever country you are.